Welcome to Grokchain Conversations. This podcast is presented by a multidisciplinary group of legal, financial, and technology professionals to meet and discuss today's most pressing questions around the use and governance of the blockchain. Through roundtable dialogue, we will provide listeners with a full spectrum of views on where this technology is today and where it might be leading. The information provided on the Grokchain Conversations is for educational purposes only. The information provided does not constitute legal, investment, financial, tax, accounting, or any other professionally licensed advice. The views expressed here are those of the individuals, not those of their respective employers or Grokchain.
This is our end of year broadcast, and we're going to do a little bit of year in review with our colleagues here and finish off with an idea about where the future could possibly be. So Haroon, is there something that stands out for you that occurred this year in the world of crypto?
Yes, I would say the big ticket item this year, probably for not only for me but for lots of other people, is the collapse of FTX. And some of the associated and some of the, I would say, churn and a new look at the crypto industry in general. I think that is for lots of people the big ticket item. It for me, and my background is a corporate lawyer. I am typically used to rules and structure and things like that, and regulation. It just shows you, from my perspective, what happens when you have insufficient regulations and folks who are simply not unable or unwilling to put up not only external regulations or government regulations, but folks internally who are unwilling or unable to create internal controls, policies, procedures to manage corporate behavior and corporate activities. I think besides the internal shortfalls, I do think a lot of this had to do with the lack of sufficient regulation. Whether FTX took advantage of that deliberately or just fell into it remains to be seen. But I do think one of the things that this has showed me, and it's something that I am hopeful for next year, is that, and I mentioned this during an earlier podcast, as much as you want DeFi to be decentralized and not have a centralized control, you put people into this sort of system and they will want some sort of structure or some sort of regulation or some sort of order or organization so that they can function either individually or in small groups or even larger groups, so that with the I would say baseline understanding of what the expectations of behavior. So for me, as much as FTX was harsh, a lot of people lost a lot of money, a lot of large institutions lost a lot of money, and there's a question about those institutions' due diligence processes. I do think it opens up it opened up a lot of eyes to show that this industry, one, is here to stay. Crypto NFTs is absolutely here to stay, and two, there needs to be some regulation that is both sufficiently, I would say, modern or progressive, is that will keep up with what's going on today, and also what is necessary going forward, since I expect the industry to evolve. The current regulations, particularly in the United States, are outdated. In Europe, in the EU, the MiCA regulations are about to be voted on. They are better than the U.S. regulations. I do hope, as a U.S. lawyer, the U.S. takes a very close look at the MiCA regulations and adopts, or at least thinks about, something like MiCA when it comes to a regulation.
So we got FTX, we got legislation, and there might have been something in the middle there that transitioned from one to the other that I missed, but those are multiple things, not just one. Which is fine. MiCA legislation was also an event this year.
I think the FTX thing was actually in the long term, probably quite useful for the industry in some ways, because what it's done, it's teased out many issues, and it's also flushed out everyone's, like quite a few people that, different groups of people that want to capitalize on it. So you got the incumbents and the establishment, like the learned report came out of the ECB saying that this is the end of Bitcoin. And that's clearly an agenda. It's flushed out, it should flush out the DeFi guys who live in a world of, hey, we're decentralized. It should have all been on some kind of decentralized protocol, and none of this would never have happened, but we live by no rules whatsoever, and everything's automated. Kind of, yeah, that's another viewpoint, another argument. And then there's the more pragmatic sort of, what legislation is appropriate. So let's not bring in forward legislation for things that haven't happened. Let's start with something pragmatic, like I think that's what MiCA does. It's a starting point, gives us certainty. It might not be perfect, but we can work with rules. As long as you have rules, you know what you're working with. If you don't have rules, like Haroon said, in the US, you're forever looking over your shoulder what the SEC might pronounce tomorrow on a perfectly legitimate decision you made today, which scares the pants off many people, and they avoid it at all costs, which isn't helpful if you live and work in the US, though. So yeah, it's a bit of a European perspective. And then I guess there's also the other actors, probably a minority, that look for the pragmatic. What rules can we help influence? What can we put in place to anticipate what the regulators may or may not come up with? What's sensible for blockchains, for protocols, and how do we make this work? Because clearly anything goes and anything happens. We see they fall out with things like FTX, so that would happen again if we just stick at the status quo. I mean, but that's not really going to happen. Too many interests in it.
Boy, the gravitational field of legislation and regulation is just too much for the two of you. I guess Tilen isn't going to change that as a lawyer.
Yes, exactly. That was exactly what I wanted to say. As a lawyer, I'm seeing a lot of things going on lately this year, things that were missing for the last decade, actually, and that is creation of new rules. And it's well, for me, it's a very difficult thing to regulation is a difficult thing for everybody, even for the legislators, because algorithms can be calibrated and presented in very different ways, and so everybody has a different perspective on it. And so but law needs categories and needs to qualify things that it's dealing with. So as soon as you create categories, then you're stuck with them usually. So I'm kind of missing this thing. It looks like the legislators, at least in the EU, think that everything and most of the things are very clear, so that we can put categories to different types of crypto innovations, and then they'll say, yeah, this is how it has to be. But this can harm the innovation quite a lot, actually. So
yeah, I totally agree. We've had a bit of a nerdy conversation in the blockchain that I've been working on around the constitution. There were a couple of people that were suggesting that we move the constitution from a principle-based constitution to a deterministic one. So every little nuance is written down by machine. And I was just arguing very strongly that no, we need human judgment here. And it was roundly defeated as an idea pretty quickly.
yes.
So I think that draws on what you were saying, that we can with certainty say a stable coin is this. Well, clearly we can't.
Yes, exactly. It's a very good point, actually. Constitutional law is very similar to this, has similar problems. Society is changing. Well, they have a different time span, right? They have like decades and centuries in view, whereas here it's more like every month or every week there's a new innovation. But the idea behind it is still the same. Like things are moving, things are changing, and we need to talk about it. I think what's more important than have precise rules is to have forums for discussion. Where do you define these rules? And this is an interesting point with MiCA or MiCA, because quite a few rules have been set now for the regulation itself, for the act itself, but a lot of things will be determined by technical standards, and it's still not quite clear who is going to set these standards, because it's quite a different thing for standards to be set by, for example, EBA or ECB or ESMA or the Commission or for example CEN, the certification organisms, the standard certification organisms, because there are different stakeholders involved. So
what kind of technical aspects are you talking about?
Sorry.
Technical standards.
Yes, I forgot the example. The example I have is in Data Act, for example, for smart contracts, reversibility of smart contracts, the Article 28 of Data Act. Others are, I think, CBDCs. What is exactly the CBDC? Things like this. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Maybe you have some examples. I'm sorry.
No. I just wanted you to clarify for the listeners.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, for example, DeFi. Right? It's not clear yet how to define it in the regulation.
Well,
I think DeFi was deliberately left out because they said, we can't regulate something we don't understand, and it's not matured at all. So I think it was a very sensible thing to leave that one out.
Yeah, exactly.
And the same with NFTs, although there was some last minute things thrown in about fractionalization of NFTs, and that would fall into securities and so on. So at least we got a bit of clarity around that you can't use it for a backdoor route of securitizing things, which is what some people thought they might be able to do. So I think the ESMA still does hang on over there and form this cloud on when you think you're being innovative. Just you have to watch very carefully. You're not falling into securities law by accident, in which case you then have the full, have you got a central counterpart? Do you have a central securities depository? Are you clearing through a custodian and so on, which is problematic unless you're very, very good at smart contracts and have a very bright legal mind to structure it.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, I've done a lot of tax work in the United States, and it's that is a rules based. The tax code in the United States is very, very, very detailed and very complicated, and the whole point of a lot of tax planning is to stay one step ahead of what's in the tax code, and that's we have all these. It's all very cynical about loopholes and what you can and can't do. And I think, to Martin's point, having a principle-based system that is not, not terribly specific is the way to go. And, and then I would also say, put in an anti-abuse rule, something like that. I mean, a general catch-all, but at the same time, general principles should be towards, innovation to be doing business. The tax, just like in the United States, tax code is basically just a measuring stick so that you know how much tax you need to pay. But to the extent that you're putting these rules in, there are some general principles of transparency, promotion of good practices, ethical behavior, stuff like that. Equitable market access and stuff like that. That is helpful. And then just to make sure that then you put out the general principles, and then you can say, well, the technical guidance can be done as and when is necessary as the technology or the industry changes. And then, from my perspective, you put in an anti-abuse rule. I mean, there are players. I mean, most people, I think, including FTX, were more or less trying to do the right thing to a greater or lesser extent. There are, I would say, charlatans out there who are simply just trying to game the system and game other people. But to the extent that you say, all right, everybody, we expect the vast majority of people who are going to be trying to use the system or be in this industry are doing it on good faith. We will structure the rules accordingly. But it remains to be seen. I think the regulations will always be a step or two the technical regulations will always be a step or two behind what is going on, the most innovative practices.
Yes, indeed, and so that's why I also think that we need maybe to define better or create new forums. Where will this be discussed? I mean, if it's just the executive power deciding through their acts, then there's no stakeholder consultations. They will just say, okay, we made a report on this, we analyzed the situation, we made a report, and so this is the best solution. And there are very little things you can do about it. I mean, we can always, lawyers can always attack this in court, but this takes years. So in the meantime, innovation goes on or is stopped.
Or goes
This is quite,
elsewhere.
I mean, this is a really important one about education for legislators and regulators. Like, where do they get their information from? And if the innovators are being all pompous about, hey, we don't need banks or rules and everything, then you're not going to get a meaningful discussion. So I think as an industry, we really have to get our act together. And I know there are initiatives from various lobbying agencies, such as, I can't remember the name off the top of my head. There's a DeFi one, but there are baby steps in this direction, but meaningful forums that have a good representation of right across the range of DeFi protocols. I think it's really important to get that message across, what we're doing, what we're thinking about, what regulation does do, what blockchain can solve. There are ways technology solves some of these regulatory issues, around we can put systems in for investor protection, for market stability, and we don't necessarily need to inherit all the structures that is a patchwork of legislation that's evolved over centuries. This is a chance to throw some of that out and say, well, where's the settlement risk here? Where's the liquidity risk? How do we mitigate that through technology? And let's look at equivalence rather than saying you must have these structures and you must do settlement T+2. Says who?
Mm. So I wonder what's happening with the sandbox right now, with this sandbox idea. I mean, for example, why don't
Spain
we
has a
just...
sandbox.
Sorry?
Spain has a sandbox.
Yeah, UK as well. I mean, the DLT pilot.
That ESMA's doing, yeah.
Yeah, ESMA is doing the same thing, sort of like a meta sandbox, so that they control the others. I mean, discuss and communicate with other national sandboxes. But I mean, I find this idea very good, very interesting. In practice, it's not always been the best thing, but why don't we just observe and see and define rules on the go? For example, like typically crypto and securities regulations. I mean, everything can be securities and nothing can. I mean, both views, both perspectives are valid, I think. I mean, we can see that with the discussion between CFTC and SEC, right? SEC says that everything is securities now. Gensler says that. Others say, no, these are commodities. So, I mean, you can actually genuinely have multiple conflicting perspectives on this thing. So, as with the Constitution, it doesn't just spring up from somewhere. It's a question of debate.
Yeah, and the same goes for things like the travel rule that that's been the way it's been implemented for crypto. I can walk into a furniture shop tomorrow with €1,000 and buy something, and I don't have to give my address if I'm paying in cash. If I'm paying in crypto, I have to share God knows what through a VASP. We're not. This is where the legislators really need to get their act together and say, that's almost contributing some of the requirements there, particularly the travel rule, with some of the GDPR issues. And it's a similar case with the advanced passenger notification that you have to give to airlines. They hang on to it for 5 months. It's this big collection of data inadvertently or without thinking of the consequence that we need to balance. And I think the instinct of regulators is often, let's go and ask for lots of information. So I know, like when I think it was earlier in the year or last year, ESMA did a consultation on reporting standards about what should we report in crypto, how does DLT cope reporting, and I think the conclusion was there aren't any obstacles. We should be able to do reporting exactly like TradFi. Well, let's think about it for 30 seconds. I am asking a centralized public ledger and all the actors on there to piece together their piece of information, to format it into whatever format the regulator requires, for them to assemble it in their databases, for them to do analysis on that, at what cost to everyone, when the information could be read straight at source. But, you know, that question wasn't even considered, I don't think.
Mm. Yes, of course. It seems like a little technical detail, but actually, what is the format of reporting is the everyday job, and it's really important. It takes a lot of time. So
Yeah.
they could
Yeah,
invest.
but you have that in all sorts of different areas. You know, even in the, you know, filing in court. I don't know how, I imagine it's the same thing in Europe, seen as an administrative whole, but here in the US, from one court to the other, you're going to have different formats where essentially you've got the same information, but presented in a different way, and you have to stick to what that court wants.
Yeah. And yeah, on the flip side, in the EU, so what language is the reporting going to be in, or should it be in?
It doesn't matter, it's data.
It's well, or
someone's address, someone's name, someone's, you know, identifier, and, you know, someone else's.
well, even if it's not just quantitative data, I mean, you can usually in Europe, I mean, we still have nation state, member states, so national authorities. So usually report in your own language or the language of the member state, home member state, and then it's translated into other languages.
Yeah, but nowadays it's just a label on a field, on a report.
Yes, exactly.
So listen, what else has gone on this year for you guys that was interesting, aside from MiCA legislation or the absence of legislation or regulatory frameworks?
If we're looking back at the summer, we could collectively ask ourselves, how did Terra get so big on such a flawed model before someone figured out how to break that peg?
Yeah, which is one of the challenges. Sorry, I'm going to go back to regulation and legislation. If you can't just regulate a token, a digital asset, because there's so much that goes below it that you have to understand in order to evaluate the level of risk, that MiCA legislation or even legislation that's been proposed here in the US is not going to be satisfactory. You can't apply the same, for argument's sake, disclosures about a company for a crypto network, or we'll call it a decentralized crypto network, or a crypto product. You know, it's just you have to take into consideration, you know, at a minimum, you know, what is the fee model? At a minimum, what are the risks of the consensus protocol? You know, how secure is it if there is a consensus protocol? Or if there is not a consensus protocol, then you definitely have a company that needs to be regulated as such. But the risks that are inherent in building, for example, an app on a centralized system are very different than those of a decentralized system.
Yes, of course.
So you have
sorry.
Then you have to look at, you know, how the software is developed. You have to look at you know, how the marketing is done. How can you know, how many software companies are there that are writing software for that particular network? How many different versions do you have? You know, what kind of competition? Then you're talking about you know, layering different marketplaces one on top of the other, but they're all interdependent and interrelated.
Yes.
What you can build on that is very different than what you can build on something else.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. If you have different framework, you can build different things. And if you compare this to traditional finance, you usually have a client, a bank, and then central bank. like three layers.
That's it.
Here, just to have a coin functioning, you have, I mean, you have users, miners, oracles, and so on. Like just
Speculators, whales.
yeah, yes, of course.
Oh,
Influencers. I mean, Kim
Influencer.
Kardashian can have a very important influence on the whole blockchain space. So there's a lot of quite a lot more layers to this technology, and none of the layers is very well understood either. I mean,
Well,
it's
no,
still
because they're
very
all
young
markets
technology.
in and of themselves with different stakeholders.
Mm.
But that all come together for the token, the brand in particular. And that's how they could identify themselves, and all those communications tools that that we've developed. And most of them since the introduction of the internet. Whether it's Discord servers or crypto, Twitter or Telegram or Signal or whatever. All of those discussions that you were talking about before, Tilen, those are discussions that occur online. The portal, the government or governments, have to come down and join the Discord discussion,
or create a new forum of discussion where we can post ideas and talk about it.
right? But they have to adopt the tools where the discussions are occurring. You can't oblige everybody, like you guys were saying before, to accommodate what the government wants. Because here we're talking about, in certain cases, censorship-resistant networks. So, you have to go and, you're obliged to find a middle ground.
Yes, that's, well, just the question of consensus on a blockchain is such a thing. So maybe there are ways of achieving consensus on other levels, other layers.
Well, that's the hope. A lot of these people in this industry who practice these sciences or these arts of consensus protocols and game theory and mechanism design and category theory and all these other things, they know how flawed it is for people to come to a decision, through voting systems or through other types of mechanisms. And but they think that because you can get computers to come to a consensus, it's easy to get people to participate in a DAO to come to consensus. It's not the same thing.
Well, I find the story about the proof of work consensus and types of processors. I find this the development evolution of processors. I find this question quite, topic quite interesting, because Satoshi thought that we'll have CPUs and maybe GPUs, but ASICs and faster FPGAs, like programmable gate array. These are things that didn't exist at that time. So all of a sudden there was there was no equality between miners anymore, because some people could buy better processors.
Or they
so
could
even,
get cheaper loans to set them up.
I mean, even if you have a technological solution, and it's not just technological solution. Proof of work is an idea that is implemented in such technology. So you'd say, well, proof of work is an excellent idea, and it works, but then technology changes, and it changes the idea behind it, the value of idea that's behind it as well. So again, constant evolution,
Right.
and it can change over time.
Bitcoin is built to last at least 140 years.
If we don't develop quantum technology, quantum computing.
No, I was talking about the halving rate.
Yeah. But Yeah. Next question is quantum computing. Right?
Yes, of course, quantum computing, hash functions, the security of the chain, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I do wonder to that last point about the security of the chain. I mean, one of the things that did interest me I mean, it's been taking place, I guess, forever, as long as you've had a blockchain. But I was just sort of surprised when all the FTX stories developed, were, hacks of the blockchain and the theft of considerable value. These things, I mean, it's just very surprising given what the blockchain is supposed to be and how it's supposed to function, and that theft or misappropriation or fraud can happen. I mean, I thought that was the whole point of having a blockchain, is to prevent all this stuff. So, from my perspective, I wonder if it's going to be, I'm not sure if it's going to be a regulatory solution, but it may be more of a technological solution going forward to either to limit the possibilities of this kind of theft, or make it easier to identify or track down. I mean, all right, you're going to steal, we're going to find you easily. You can't just disappear into the ether. How you're going to address these vulnerabilities, but these vulnerabilities were stark, and a lot of it is because, and not to be too cynical about it, it's because a lot of institutional players, particularly in the United States, were victims of what happened with FTX, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my goodness, we have to do something. These are, I can be extremely cynical about this and say, this is a bunch of wealthy people who lost some money, and so somebody's going to have to pay for it.
All right, but hold on. FTX is a centralized exchange. It's got nothing to do with crypto. Whether, the fact that he was using crypto as an asset to be traded, or as assets to be traded, is completely irrelevant to the behavior and to what he did. Okay, so, and with regard to the security of a blockchain, the thefts, yes, they can occur on a blockchain, but if it's developed correctly, then it won't. The thefts you're talking about are at a smart contract level, where you're doing programmable money, if you like.
Yeah.
A lot of the blockchains themselves, the layer 1 blockchains, have not been hacked. They, some of them have, some of them have had like denial of service attacks that they haven't been able to recover from, but the information per se, it's all encrypted. So it's not really of any interest.
And I find this, I mean, this is a very funny or a sad thing, or almost a paradox. I mean, blockchain is quite a secure technology compared to maybe the most secure technology of all existing right now. But at the same time, I mean, FTX didn't create a simple algorithm to protect the funds. I mean, how is it possible they can just take clients' funds and invest them in something else? I mean, it's just a very rule you can make and say only this person can do it, and you publish this on the internet and you say if money is gone, this is the guy you have to chase or something. Like, so it's the easiest solution. For this problem, and they didn't solve it, and nobody asked about it. I mean, it's I mean, we talk about blockchain security, but at the same time, I mean, all these centralized entities, typically exchanges, I wonder what's the security behind it. I mean, technologically speaking, why don't we just invent? Well, decentralized exchanges are a solution, but I mean, you can make a secure algorithm for a centralized exchange. I mean, you don't have to base everything on blockchain. You just say, well, you just prevent certain people from accessing the funds and things like this. I mean, it's quite.
Well, what's interesting, it ties into a big discussion that happened earlier in this year, was around this concept of I can't remember which organization came up with the name, but they started talking about unhosted wallets as the implication it's only used by shady people. Had the customers of FTX had a non-custodial solution where they held onto stuff in their own wallets and managed their own keys, then they couldn't have borrowed those funds for speculating through a hedge fund, could they? Because they controlled and custody by yourself. And even then it's problematic when we talk about custody, because we're not actually sending, like in the olden days, a piece of paper, a share certificate, to a storeroom anymore, which is what a custodian used to do. And when it went to dematerialize, the same sort of notion. I'm doing a booking from my entity across to another one, and then they're managing, they're responsible. This is a central ledger. All we're really doing is moving assets around on a central ledger. And what we hold in what we call a wallet, which to me is completely the wrong name for it, is a key. So we have a key fob. We don't have, it's not two bits of leather stitched together with some notes stuck in with, with a ledger inside it of, well, I hold this 20 note and a 10 note and whatever. It's not like that. That's not really what a crypto wallet's about. But it's those keys give you the right to move those things around. Now, that's really one of the discussions that got quite heated this summer about, should we ban unhosted wallets as one of the proposals? But actually, it's the opposite is true. We should make them more robust. And I mean, it's not ideal having to write down your secret recovery phrase and storing that and giving that extra admin of making sure it's secure and don't lose it. But there's ways around that with verifiable credentials, fragmenting threshold signatures, multi-part computing, that sort of thing. There are ways around it, but the principles are you should be able to be in charge of that, even when you invest somewhere. You, like in staking, they're still you still have the key. You don't give them to anyone. Mm-hmm. And that would have really helped a lot, I think, in this situation.
Absolutely. Which is why it's not a crypto issue. FTX is, I think it's more a business model issue. You said before, am I investing in a hedge fund? Well, if I'm, taking my dollars and turning them into ETH in my FTX account, I don't think I'm investing in a hedge fund. I'm not giving you money to, my money to make money. It's still my money. And instead, it seems that he confused the two because probably he didn't know any better.
They all, at least two most responsible people in the FTX had worked at Jane Street. They knew everything about risk. I mean, what's the story about they didn't know?
No. They know what a hedge fund is. They don't know what an exchange business is.
Wow. Is it? I don't know if it's that different. I mean, even if you don't know, you're in the business and you know that these are the questions you have to ask yourself and give the answers to.
Well, or you have some hubris and you're like, well, I'm making so much money, I'll be able to pay this stuff back, and in the meantime, I've got full bags.
Which is entirely reckless.
Right, but he's 29 years old.
Yeah.
I've seen the accounts, or I've even made the accounts or tried to make the accounts for some of these crypto companies. And there's just not the tooling to be able to come up with books. So when the administrators came in and said, "Oh, wait a minute, there are no books here," I was like, not surprised at all.
But that may be part of the solution, is to develop the tooling, or at least develop some sort of interface so that you can keep the books and satisfied.
None of them are really good. Believe me, I've looked. I'm going to give a plug here to Softledger. Thank you guys, love you. They did a really good job. They're still working at it hard, but they're still not quite there. Especially for trading, trading financial instruments. They basically, they met their software, their accounting software allows you to pull in data, but basically from networks and from exchanges. But if you start doing, puts, calls, options, all that, derivative stuff, nothing. Even margin lending, they can't manage it. Try to get the margin lending information out of Bitfinex into your software. Good luck. It's not going to happen.
Sounds like a business opportunity in some respect for somebody.
But there are a lot of people working on it. It's just nobody has come up with tooling that's good enough. That's why, even Coinbase, who seems to be doing relative, being very conservative, they don't have a lot of sophisticated financial instruments.
But is it because you'd like to have it decentralized based on blockchain and so on? I mean, these are tools that exist in traditional finance. It's just very basic tools. You know what I mean? It's,
I can tell you that I've seen trades, I've seen operations, orders, sorry, that got executed with 75,000 transactions. One order.
Yes, of course. It's high frequency trading, right?
Right, but when but you have the computer equipment to manage that information.
Yeah,
you're not getting it from one exchange that's getting the information off of a blockchain. Off of two different blockchain networks. One that runs at whatever, one block per 10 minutes, and the other one at one block per 13 seconds. You have a lot of information to manage, and you don't have the tooling to do it.
Yes, is that so? It's a question of technical standards then.
Well, do you want to pull 75,000 transactions into your accounting system? Your auditors would go bananas. It's one order. You should be able to regroup it as one order with, the ability to get the information.
But the modern way of thinking it is that you take the calculations to where the data is. So if you've got 5 platforms, you go and ask the question, collect the data, and come back with the answers you need. Not haul in the data into one central platform, then do your calculations.
Well, that's actually what's going on right now with MiFID II in Europe and actually US as well, NMS and regulation ATS, the new one. It's about clock synchronization, data formats, and how to reassemble this information. One of the examples I really like in high frequency trading that I use in conferences is, for example, the idea of sending signals through satellites. So, I mean, Starlink, for example, will definitely be used by high frequency trading. Even though some people say no, but I'm pretty sure this is one of the big reasons for doing it. But in general, but these are very low orbit satellites. I mean, in slightly higher orbits, you have time dilation, right? Because of gravity. Gravity is different. So so the time is running differently. How do you assemble all this?
Right? So do you think we'll be looking at satellite extractable value then in high frequency trading?
Actually, the solution is just to see how the transactions are actually concluded in the end when the order arrives. Well, one of my points to criticize this is also that, for example, when you send it, you don't have the same picture as the picture at the exchange, for example, the people at the exchange. Or, for example, regulators now we're building a big database that they will collect all the data from all the trading venues. We have over 200 venues. You talked about 5 blockchains. We have over 200 venues in Europe, and all the data has to be synchronized to 100 microseconds. This is the standard right now. So it's quite a big thing. And I mean, it's definitely possible. It's a lot of money, a lot of, that's just mainly a lot of money to.
Right, but you do that by having 200 nodes all running on a closed circuit.
In what sense, closed circuit?
A private permission network.
Oh yes. Oh, talking about blockchains.
Yeah.
Mm.
That's why they all have one source of truth. It's a lot easier than trying to synchronize a whole bunch of data. I mean, you're essentially synchronizing the databases, right?
Mm.
They all have the same information.
I think in high frequency, it's more time sensitive than that. You have to prove what did you do at that time to get best execution, that kind of thing. And so it's very important in the high frequency context, what time you did what and what sequence. And those clocks is the issue, that they're not all exactly the same.
Right.
Yeah. Whereas in a blockchain, it's not time sensitive in a high frequency setting. We don't do microseconds, nanoseconds. It's, Bitcoin trundles away at 15 minutes. The best blockchains can do it in a couple of seconds, but I mean, that's like a day in the world of high frequency.
But that's if you have a public permissionless chain. If you just have 200 nodes or 100 nodes, whatever, that everybody taps into, or even the Australian stock exchange with 3 nodes.
There's still overheads when you're synchronizing state machines between even 3 nodes, never mind 200. But yeah, I think we're getting slightly off topic here.
Sorry, it was interesting.
No, it was. So what are our predictions for next year? And I've just discovered GPT today, and I've asked the question, what's the outlook for blockchain in 2023? So I'll read it to you because it's interesting. So the outlook for blockchain technology in 2023 is generally positive, with continued growth and adoption expected in a variety of industries. Can we argue with that?
No.
Does it have data on FTX collapse or not?
I could ask it.
Because somebody I read that somewhere, like somebody asked about some recent event, and the GPT said, actually I only have data up until September 2021 or something like that.
Okay. Yeah, so maybe this outlook is actually for this year. It's old data.
Yeah. No predictions. I think I'm positive about blockchain being here to stay forever. It's not an issue. The issue I see is different wars between different stakeholders and their interests. Central banks have certain agendas. We all understand now. Commercial banks don't have the same agendas. They also want to make profit on this. We have different crypto companies and users or future users that we don't even know yet. So I wonder what's going to happen around this. I'm a bit afraid that it would be a shame if the grassroots crypto markets just fall apart, and it's the banks commercial banks that take this over. And I mean, if you have your normal bank account, and somebody will say, well, now actually you also have a Santander coin there, and you have to use it to pay. I mean, everybody will use it, even my grandmother. And they will not ask questions anymore. Like typically a digital euro, for example. Yeah. So I wonder I would just like to see these grassroots crypto markets to stay here as well, just to be a competition to others.
I think we've seen a parallel universe for a couple of years already. Like, I see on LinkedIn a whole load of pictures from a blockchain conference, and you look into it a bit more, and it's like this parallel universe of banks talking about innovation groups and permissioned chains between themselves. And then there's the wild side, which is where the innovation, the open source happens. And that collaboration, I think, is way, way stronger than one or two banks doing some, marginal cooperation between each other. So I think, it'd be very hard to kill off the genuine innovation going on. I think maybe we've seen the collapse of some of the more frothy elements of DeFi, the speculation of, magicking up 25% APR, which is definitely a game of the last sucker and not really sustainable. But if, like I've seen recently, is a lot more activity around real world assets, solving real world problems using blockchain technology. So, smart contracts are powerful in what they can do to automate, about connecting parties, about sharing that information, having a common understanding of where we're at with the transaction is very powerful, and businesses will be innovating there. So I'm slightly more optimistic that the independents, the free innovators and thinkers will continue down that path, and they'll find routes. And I think the corporate land will continue thinking they're innovating with permission chains until they don't. Then they realize, oh, hang on, there's a massive ecosystem out there that we've been ignoring. And at that point, they either try and buy everyone up, which is more difficult in a decentralized world, or they have to roll their sleeves up and catch up.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I'm convinced also that despite all the issues and all the lack of sort of consensus, that blockchain crypto are here to stay. I view this as it's growing pains as let's say the 1920s were in terms of in the United States in terms of securities and speculation, because there was just some insufficient regulation, and then in the aftermath came out Securities Act, Securities Investment Act, Companies Act, so on and so forth. I think that's what's going to happen here. I view a lot of the blockchain, the crypto, whether you view this as having crypto as something that is intrinsically valuable as it's in itself. I have Bitcoin, it is valuable, or I have Bitcoin, therefore, and you use it instead as a tool to do other stuff, or to use for other things. As a means rather than just a source of value or a source of investment. I think those are going to be the key things that get teased out in the future. There will be regulation coming. Hopefully, it's not too tilted towards institutions and big players, so that there's still room for innovation. But certainly, I view these things. Blockchain is a useful, valuable process, or the use of the blockchain is a good process. Cryptocurrencies, NFTs, even the stuff with the Bored Ape Yacht Club and some of the sort of more marginal or speculative things, I would say conceptually that stuff is here to stay. There will be winners and losers in the short term, some big winners and some big losers in the short term, and there will be some suckers in the short term. But certainly, I do think this is just as I don't know, technology evolves. We went from Web 1, and we went from securities to electronic trading, and now we've got the internet, and now we've got web, getting towards Web 3, or whatever you want to call it. So yeah, I absolutely think it's here to stay, because people will find a way to use it and to create value, genuine value, using these tools.
Yes, and especially Web 3.0 and metaverse and things like this. I mean, this is typically an environment that is quite decentralized. I mean, you don't know other people; these are just avatars and so on. So you need a secure way of transferring value, and blockchain does exactly that. I mean, there's no other way of doing that at the moment. So, but I think we're talking about two different things. One is the value of blockchain, for example, for organizing communities. So you extract value from something else than just the value of the token, and then the value of the token. So if we talk about the value of the token, we talk about markets, and markets are problematic here. For example, with these crashes going on, some others will come later on. It's you lose people. If you lose people, you lose liquidity, right? You don't have users, you don't have traders, you can lose liquidity. So this markets, crypto markets, I think might go towards the bigger institutions. So we should work more on different kinds of projects as well. Well, connect them or something like that. And create value from organizing communities, rather than just making new tokens.
So you see it more as an organizational opportunity.
Yes, definitely.
Like a means to an end.
Yes, I mean, you see, we talked about, in human history, political science, we talked about libertarianism or even communism, not in the sense that it was implemented, but communism by itself, by definition, was a decentralized market-based economy, where everybody takes care of himself or herself, and so but this kind of political systems, they still require some sort of cooperation, right? The liberal capitalism is about defining some values in the constitution and say this is how we will govern ourselves. This is the governance protocol, and it's been the same more or less for the last 200 years. Now, the more we decentralize the governance, the more we need, the more it's organic, the more it moves it evolves more quickly as well. So we'll need. I mean, this is definitely the way to go, and but we'll have to be innovating in this space. It's not just about coins. It can really transform the society.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because a lot of the innovation comes from, we'll call it, people in the world who were influenced, if not outrightly grew up under communism.
Mm.
You know, a lot of Eastern Europeans, a lot of Europeans, but you know, in a way, if you look at it as a productive entity, you're correcting for centrally controlled government economies, and yet still being able to coordinate in a network that's providing a service that you can price based on the scarcity of the block space, or the scarcity of the fee mechanism.
If I may just add 2 cents, it's not necessarily communism. It's not just. I mean, it was not just Soviet Union. There was, for example.
No, China. You know.
No. It's just what I'm trying to say is in Yugoslavia, for example, there was cooperative communism. So it meant that actually factories were owned by the workers there, the workers who worked in that factory, right? And this is typically something that can be done in a liberal capitalist society.
Huh.
I mean, we just the people who work there actually own the company, also shareholders.
Oh, wow.
And this is the kind of things I'm thinking about. So there are some interesting ideas, for example, or organizing a supply chain. I think we talked about this, Alessandro, last summer.
Still working on it.
Yes.
Right.
And typically in Europe, we have this problem with supermarkets, right? They're big and they're holding cash. When you're a client, you buy, I don't know, a yogurt and you pay straight away, right? But the supermarket pays the supplier in 60 or even 90 days. So they're hoarding actually cash. So they're annoying the whole supply chain, right? I mean, I can very easily see blockchain used in supply chain in a way to, for example, say, farmers need more money in spring, so they get more cash in spring. And so on. You see, like each supply chain gets more money or more cash at certain periods of the year or something like that. See, and this is not a liberal way of thinking, right? A liberal way of thinking is that we're atomistic society, everyone on his or her own, and we don't cooperate. So we have a company or an individual, and everybody's in competition, and this is how it works. And sometimes you get monopolies and they destroy everything. Sort of, it's the narrative, right? But here you can very easily see different types of companies working together to make their own the entire supply chain to make it function better, and everybody gets more profit as well. But we practically don't have a legal category to encompass this, like cooperatives, but this is some sort of.
No, I know. It's not based on ownership in the same sense that traditionally we have legislated ownership of property.
Yes.
It's a completely different beast.
Yes. You could say it's not, you're not owning something, for example, in this supply chain example, you don't own something physical, but you share the same values, so you organize together on this level, on the level of supply chain, not just on the level of the firm or the government, but on the level of supply chain or some other community like this.
Well,
So
that's the interesting thing about blockchain is, we're all talking about, these networks of computers and how many bloody copies they've got of the same ledger. But you got to get the software on the computer, and someone has to be willing, as I think you mentioned before, to make that investment,
Yeah.
whether it be, to use my computer and take the time to modify it, or to buy an ASICs machine and, a whole factory of, ASICs machines and, connect it in a, to make all of those decisions. I have to know that that software is going to give me the same chances as everybody else to mine a block, or, relatively similar. And that once I've mined the next valid block, and, we all agree on it, I get the mining reward. And without that assuredness, I can't even start building the network.
mm,
It's got to be that easy. That's why Vitalik lately has been talking about, using zero knowledge proofs to mine blocks on your cell phone and then send them to the network. Yeah. I would have thought Solana would have done that because they came out of the out of Qualcomm, but I don't know what the heck they're doing. They're a mess.
mm. But yeah, I think this also increases. I don't know how you phrased it, but it increases transparency as well. For example, in the supply chain, like now, nobody. I mean, it's the supermarket that decides for the whole supply chain, whereas there's no discussion about it. It's just the supermarket does their thing. They do their thing, and on the other hand, you have the government making new laws every 5 years almost
Right,
to
but you're
protect.
forgetting something with the supermarket. Now you have Amazon and food delivery companies who are competing with those grocery stores or supermarkets, and they know the actual person and what they're eating in their home and where they live, so they can do a much better job than a local supermarket that doesn't have that detail of information, even though they've gotten it in the past um, through fidelity systems, rewards programs,
Yes.
so that
But
they can get all of that person. They can associate, your credit card, your payment with an account, and they can know exactly what you bought and what your buying habits are, and then run that through their software.
yeah,
To be honest with you, this is not a good idea, because you're taking information, your personal data, and you're putting it in the hands of very few players. Whereas if this data were readily available, or more easily available, not in those silos, the farmer would know that, every week you buy, a bushel of carrots, whatever,
yes.
and they can send that to you directly. That cuts out everybody
Peer-to-peer.
else.
Yeah, peer-to-peer, not just on software, but actually.
Well, farm to table, I like to think of it, but
Yeah, sure.
not just to,
Yeah,
not to
the
make
only,
fun of anybody.
the only problem is that, for example, in Slovenia, we don't have oranges all year long, right?
Yeah, but you can get them from Valencia.
Yeah, well, I mean, supermarket buys tons of oranges from Northern Africa, at least in Slovenia, and they get better prices. And now here, for example, because I work with some people working on this project, on this kind of project, we in Slovenia we love buying local, but the problem is the prices. Like it's really hard. First of all, a farmer is usually small because it's an alpine region mostly, so the farms are smaller. So the cost of production is already very high, and then they have to deliver this to houses. They have to pay for the gas, for example, and a person to do it. And you get like 2 or 3 times the price of your salads in the supermarket.
But
I
you
mean,
get better quality food too.
yeah.
You
I
get
mean, I
much
guess it
better
works
quality.
until now, and now with all the crisis and things, I think we'll start buying in the supermarkets again.
Yeah, and you'll become like Americans, and you'll get unhealthy.
Yeah. Oh no.
No, it's terrible.
Look at Haroon, he's a picture of health.
Hey,
Haroon, yes.
I don't know. I just
That's
go to
because
the
you
farmer's
don't eat
market.
American. Do you eat an American diet?
Me? No, I don't know. I eat my own diet. I tend to eat healthy.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I would say to the larger point, it's almost, it becomes this almost feels, where do you want the information or the data to be, or how centralized do you want it to be? If you have it too decentralized, then is it meaningful? Is it useful? Can you do something with it? And then if it's too centralized, if only a couple people control it, let's say like Facebook or like Amazon, then then it's like having mind readers in your house,
Well, that's why you want to anonymize that data as much as possible.
right.
And you want to be able to decide who you want to make that available to, or if you want to make it available. And crypto gives you that opportunity. But beyond that, just to pick up on one of your points, Haroon, it needs to be, well, as the pandemic and the consequences of the depth of the pandemic have demonstrated with regard to supply chains, going through too many centralized actors makes it too brittle. You need to have much more flexibility in your supply chain. And even now, when we're trying to decouple from this globalization for some stupid ass reason, it's really hard to change the supply chains because they're just too rigid. Whereas if you have the information available online, maybe today, the Slovenians are buying locally, and there's a market change, and somebody from North Africa or Spain or the Middle East comes in and fills that void because they know that there's a demand. They can see the demand. And that smooths out your market for
you. Yes, well, it's still if you send a few oranges from Northern Africa to Slovenia, it's still the cost is still high. But yes, I completely agree with that. Yeah.
Well, then
information.
The internet is a demand-driven instrument. If you don't actually go there and ask it something, in something, it just kind of sits there, it's dead. That's why in crypto there's this liveness problem, apparently. A term that's very vague to me. But it's not going to do anything. So you need, having that information of what your consumers in this geographic area consume, what their buying habits are, at the individual level, gives you that pull, gives you that information in order to pull things through the supply chain. But it needs to be protected. Sorry, I didn't have anything else to say.
Yeah.
No, it's been an hour, so I don't know if we.
Yes, we should stop.
I don't. If there's a new topic or.
No, it's fine, because my view of the future is that over the last year we've seen a lot of bad actors get flushed out. We've seen that crypto is not made for centralized businesses. It's not the right. You have a new tool that does something new, Don't use it to do old shit. Doesn't work. But more than that, there's been a whole bunch of tooling that's been developed and that's come to the market recently. And every month there's more and more tooling coming out. DeFi summer wouldn't have been possible without new tooling. NFTs wouldn't have been possible with new tooling. Now we have zero knowledge proofs that are coming in that are going to be quite significant. It's going to create a lot of possibilities. We have roll-ups. We have all these different strategies for scaling. As Martin was saying before, you have all of these bankers, and then you have all of these rebels. And something? A lot of those bankers are gray hair. A lot of those rebels, they're like in their 20s and 30s. My bet's on them. They're building their future. Not buying ours. It's a good retirement plan. So yeah, I'm very optimistic for the future.
Yes. Yeah. Future is bright. There are going to be hiccups and bumps in the road, like there always, but it's going to be good.
Good. Well, thank you,
agree.
gentlemen.
Yeah.
And good holidays to all of you. And we'll start this again in the new year.
Wishing you all a very healthy and happy holiday season. Thank you.
Yes. Happy holidays to everyone. Thank you for
Happy holidays. See you next year.
That.
Yeah.